For the last 2 days, Nigerians have watched a man hand his accuser the very weapon meant to clear his own name. On Monday, June 8, Kenneth Okonkwo sat down on Channels Television's Sunrise Daily and made a direct claim that Peter Obi and Southeast Caucus members of the Nigeria Democratic Congress demanded 10 million naira from House of Representatives aspirants and 20 million naira from Senate aspirants during the party's primaries. That Obi personally compiled the candidate list from a hotel room in Abuja. And that one aspirant, Obunike Ohayegbu, had sent him proof, a message and a payment receipt. Read that again slowly. He released this material after his own named source had already gone on air and disowned the central claim. What the documents actually show matters more than what Okonkwo said about them. The receipt he posted as proof of a bribe to Obi was on its face a payment to the official NDC bank account, the same account Ohayegbu said the National Secretary directed him to pay into. And in the WhatsApp screenshot itself, the message attributed to Ohayegbu does not say Obi took the money. It says, in effect, that the aspirant felt scammed and that the party, not named individuals, bore responsibility. Multiple observers on social media pointed out that gap within hours of the post going up, with one user describing the receipt as ordinary payment for an expression of interest form, not evidence of extortion. This is the architecture of the dispute. An allegation that named a specific person, Obi, on a bribe, supported by evidence that, when examined, names neither Obi nor a bribe. Under Nigerian law, defamation does not require the claimant to prove financial loss. Once a court finds that a statement was published, that it referred to the claimant, and that it carried a meaning capable of lowering him in the estimation of right-thinking members of society, damage is presumed. The legal question is not whether Obi suffered measurable harm. It is whether what Okonkwo said and what he then released to support it meets that threshold of meaning. And the evidence Okonkwo chose to make public is now part of that record. Why now? The NDC is mid-primary cycle, with the 2027 ticket and Southeast power distribution still being negotiated. Okonkwo, a chieftain of the rival African Democratic Congress and a former Obi spokesperson turned vocal critic, has positioned himself as the man exposing internal NDC corruption at the exact moment the party's candidate list is being finalized. If the allegation had held, it would have handed the ADC and other rivals a corruption narrative against Obi heading into the next electoral phase. The timing was built for maximum disruption to the NDC's primary process. But the calculation assumed Ohayegbu would stay silent, or at least not appear on the same network on the very next broadcast day to contradict the story in real time. That assumption did not survive 24 hours. This pattern, a political figure citing an unnamed or since recanting source to make a corruption claim, followed swiftly by legal threats and a scramble to produce supporting material, is not new in Nigerian politics. Allegations built on private messages or anonymous insiders have repeatedly collapsed once the named source spoke publicly, turning the accuser's evidence into the subject of the dispute rather than the proof of it. But here is where the story most people are following gets it wrong. The version circulating treats this as a simple binary. Either Okonkwo has the goods on Obi or he is lying. What is actually unfolding is 3 separate fights happening at once, and Okonkwo is now fighting on all 3 fronts simultaneously. If what I just laid out changes how you see this story, that's worth sitting with, because what comes next complicates it further. Consider what this development does simultaneously to each side's position. For Obi, the pre-action letter accomplishes 3 things at once. It creates a formal legal record that can be pointed to regardless of whether the case ever reaches court.
It forces Okonkwo to either produce stronger evidence or retreat publicly on a clock, and it reframes the narrative for NDC-aligned audiences from "Is Obi corrupt?" to "Is Okonkwo telling the truth?" For Okonkwo, the WhatsApp release accomplishes the opposite of what he intended. It was meant to end the conversation about whether he had proof. Instead, it started a new conversation about whether his proof says what he claims it says, and that conversation is now happening in public, with the original source actively participating against him. And, procedurally, both moves set up the next phase. If Obi proceeds beyond the pre-action letter, Okonkwo's own published material, the screenshots, the receipt, and his on-air claims, and Ohabwegu's on-air denial, all become part of the evidentiary record the moment litigation begins. He has, in effect, pre-filed some of the opposing side's exhibits. Okonkwo himself is now fighting on multiple fronts. First, the legal front, a 5 billion naira demand with a 7-day clock, where his own released evidence may now work against him. Second, the public credibility front, where the gap between his claims and his documents has already been flagged by independent observers, not just NDC loyalists. And third, the political front, where his attempt to damage Obi's standing within the NDC ahead of 2027 risks instead reinforcing Obi's camp's narrative that the allegations were manufactured. Everything I've told you about this calculation assumes one thing, that the WhatsApp screenshots and the receipt are authentic and unaltered. Neither side has disputed their authenticity. Ohabwegu's objection is to Okonkwo's characterization of what they show, not the documents themselves. That distinction matters because it means this dispute may not turn on whether the documents are real, but what a court decides they actually prove. Step back from the individuals and a familiar pattern emerges. Private communications, screenshots, voice notes, leaked chats are increasingly being deployed as public evidence in Nigerian political disputes, often by the person who recorded or received them, with little regard for whether the full context supports the conclusion being drawn from them. This is not only a Nigerian story. International observers tracking the 2027 election cycle, diaspora media, foreign correspondents, and election monitoring organizations are watching how Nigerian politicians handle evidence and contradiction in real time on camera within 48 hours. For figures like Obi, who has cultivated a reputation for institutional integrity as part of his political brand, and for Okonkwo, who has built a post-2023 media presence on being the outspoken insider, how this plays out shapes how each is read by audiences well beyond Nigeria's borders.
Now, the strongest case for Okonkwo's side. If even part of his underlying claim is true, that aspirants were asked for payments beyond the prescribed expression of interest fees, regardless of who specifically authorized it, that is a legitimate governance question about NDC's primary process, and raising it serves a public function even if the specific attribution to Obi was wrong or overstated. A 5 billion naira defamation demand against a political commentator, even one who got details wrong, carries a chilling effect risk. It signals to other critics that raising uncomfortable questions about a presidential candidate's party could carry a price tag with 9 zeros, regardless of how the underlying facts shake out. It's also worth noting a pattern that complicates the dramatic framing. Very large defamation demands against Nigerian politicians and commentators are common, but cases that proceed all the way to a court-ordered payment of anything close to the demanded sum are comparatively rare. Pre-action letters often function as public statements and negotiating positions as much as genuine litigation pathways. The real battle is in the next 7 days, the window Obi's lawyers gave Okonkwo to respond, and I do not know yet whether this ends in a retraction, a courtroom, or simply fades as the next political story takes over.
There are three paths from here. Path 1. Okonkwo retracts or significantly walks back his claims within the 7-day window, framing it as clarification rather than surrender. This is the lowest cost exit for him politically. Path 2. Okonkwo escalates as he has already threatened by promising to divulge confidential information from his time as Obi's spokesperson, turning this into a wider exposure fight with unpredictable material on both sides. Path 3. The one that ends his current position as a credible accuser. Obi's team proceeds to file in court using Okonkwo's own released evidence as part of the claimant's exhibits, and the case becomes a referendum on what the WhatsApp messages actually say, rather than on Obi's conduct. 3 signals to watch. First, does Okonkwo respond to the 7-day deadline with new evidence or with rhetoric? New evidence would suggest he has more in reserve. Rhetoric alone would suggest the WhatsApp release was the extent of what he has. Second, does Ohegbu or any other named aspirant come forward with further statements for either side? Additional aspirants speaking up would indicate this is a pattern beyond one disputed conversation. Silence would leave it as a single contested exchange. Third, does Obi's team actually file in court, or does the dispute remain at the pre-action letter stage? A filing would signal Obi's camp believes the released evidence helps their case. No filing within weeks would suggest both sides prefer this stay a media dispute rather than a legal one. At the beginning of this video, I told you that Okonkwo released evidence to save himself and that it may have already finished him. Here is the deeper layer. The evidence didn't fail because it was fake. It failed because the person Okonkwo named as his source had already publicly told a different story, and Okonkwo published anyway. That is not a documents problem. That is a verification problem in a political environment where verification is now happening live on camera within a single news cycle. Watch the next 7 days. If Okonkwo cannot produce a statement, document, or person that directly contradicts Ohegbu's on-air denial, this story's center of gravity shifts from what did Obi do to what did Okonkwo get wrong and why. What this means for anyone watching Nigerian politics heading into 2027 is the speed at which a claim can now be tested and can collapse in real time is new. That should change how all of us, viewers included, treat a bombshell claim the moment it drops before the second half of the story has had time to arrive. You now know something most people scrolling past the headlines tonight will not be told. If this breakdown changed how you read the story, share it. That's how the second half of his story catches up to the first half. Naija Unmasked, nothing stays hidden here. I'll see you in the next one.